It is so wonderful to be back here at Unity and to draw from the spirit that is this community. I'm so honored by the invitation to join you again and humbled by the opportunity you've given me to make a contribution to that wonderful well of spirit that we have here. I suppose that it's fair to say that during this part of the worship, it's my job to talk and it's your job to listen. If you should happen to finish before I do, just let me know. You know, since coming to live in Hawaii about 9 years ago, I've had so many opportunities to feast on the array of shapes and sizes, colors, and ethnicities in which the residents of these islands come. This reality and the many conversations that I've had and I've participated in since becoming a part of this community got me thinking about some other encounters with multiculturalism that I've had in my life and about the entire subject itself. This morning I want to share some of those thoughts with you. So some years ago, the senior rabbi of the congregation that I was then serving came to see me and asked me whether I might be able to represent our congregation and the Jewish community overall at a workshop being conducted by the Houston Police Department. I honestly don't recall the name of the workshop, but I do remember that it contained within it the term cultural diversity. Now, I considered myself cultured and also a fan of diversity, so I agreed to participate. I arrived at the workshop venue at the scheduled time. When I walked in, I saw that I was one of about 150 people who had registered for this workshop, and that we were indeed a culturally and racially varied group. We began with the usual welcomes and introductions, and then we set to task. First, we divided into small groups. Then each of the small groups was given an orange. We were told to examine our orange very, very carefully, which is what we did. Then we were told to return our orange to the pile at the front of the room. The pile was then shuffled. Each group was at that point asked to send a representative to the front of the room to retrieve our particular orange, which, given our meticulous examination a few moments earlier, was not that hard to do. Then we were asked to peel the orange, which, notwithstanding the juice on the carpet, little stains, we were also able to accomplish without too much difficulty. Finally, we were told the purpose of all of these activities. Each of the oranges, we were reminded, was different. Yet, when peeled, each was virtually indistinguishable from the other. The point, of course, was obvious. Though each of us may be different on the outside, deep down inside, we're all the same. Very nice, yes. Not exactly a new idea, but they're still very nice. But wait a minute. Is it? You see, the ostensible goal of the workshop was to encourage each of the participants to recognize and respect cultural diversity. But what the exercise and the others that followed it seemed to be emphasizing was not respect at all, in my opinion. No, not respect, rather irrelevance. The message seemed to be, yes, we all do appear to be different, but in reality, these differences aren't of much consequence, and if we simply try to overlook them, we'll all get along much better. Well, I don't know about that. And leaving the workshop, I couldn't help but wonder why it is that we need to diminish differences in order to accept them. Then I got to wondering something else. Where exactly did this belief in the worth and even the possibility of cross-cultural tolerance even come from? One place it did not come from was the philosopher Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes wrote in 17th century England, and he summed up the human condition rather gloomily as simply saying, war, everyone against everyone. Now, as essentially broad-minded people, and certainly as participants in a democratic society, we typically decry bigotry and intolerance, as we should. Yet I wonder how often we stop to consider why this is so. Is it, for example, purely out of selfish self-interest? Out of the fear that if we don't foster tolerance for all, sooner or later someone will come for us? Or are there better, deeper reasons? Well, let me suggest that there are indeed at least 3 such better reasons, which I'm guessing will not be unfamiliar to most of you. The first is that an awareness of and respect for diverse cultures in our society is basically good for all concerned. Through knowledge and understanding of the different ways we think and live and worship, the participants of each culture learn valuable insights from one another. Moreover, the coexistence of diverse cultures side by side should ideally challenge each one to grow. Throughout our history, for example, the Jewish tradition has been strengthened tremendously as a result of such challenges. And it is no exaggeration to say that who we are today has everything to do with who our neighbors have been. The second reason we tend to support diversity and tolerance is similarly pragmatic. And is expressed in the Jewish tradition in the Hebrew phrase, mipnei darchei shalom, because it is the best way to keep the peace, as it were. Given the demographic makeup of most communities in the United States and certainly in Hawaii, it is the only way we can exist as a society. We can either coexist or not exist. But then the question arises, and it arises with a vengeance in a variety of places on the mainland. What about communities that are not racially heterogeneous? What about places that are not religiously or culturally diverse? Places like parts of Oregon or Idaho or Washington or areas in the Deep South or other areas. Are they expected to subscribe to the same values of pluralism and respect for differences that we do, at least on paper? What's in it for them? Well, what's in it for them is that not to do so, at least from a genuine religious perspective, is patently unethical, which is the third reason the Jewish community has historically championed diversity and tolerance. Now, I know that Jews are not the only religious community that affirms the worth and value of religious traditions other than their own. Thank God. But the Jewish tradition is the one that I know best, and may be the one about which many of you know the least. Some of you may know the least. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about this morning, and I hope that's okay. Is that okay? Is that okay? Okay. So with that said, let me begin by telling you that the Jewish perspective on religious pluralism can be summed up in 4 important texts. These texts teach us a great deal not only about why respect for other cultures is important, but also about how to practice it. The first comes from the Mishnah, the 2nd century collection of Jewish law. The Mishnah was the first attempt to gather and systematize the wisdom of the early rabbis who, just to give some historical perspective, lived at the same time as Jesus. Wrote one of these rabbis, "Therefore was a single human being created, that none might say, my lineage is greater than yours." Now this sounds suspiciously like the more contemporary, deep down, we're all the same. But friends, don't be fooled by that cheap imitation. Because, of course, there's a problem with this notion of sameness. Simply put, we are not, in fact, the same. I'm not black. Neither am I Asian or deaf, nor a woman. I am a Caucasian Jewish man of Eastern European descent who happens to be different from every other Caucasian, Ashkenazic Jewish man on earth. As the second text from the Jewish tradition tells us, a man strikes many coins from one die, and they are all alike. But God strikes everyone from the die of the first one, and not one is identical to the other. We all share a common origin. None of us may lay claim to a higher or better lineage. But this does not make us identical. Indeed, it is our very uniqueness that makes us human. Deep down inside, we are not all the same. More to the point, however, is a different question. Why should someone have to be like us to be accepted by us? Isn't the whole point to accept even those unlike us? Permit me to answer this question with a poignant incident from my own life. Following college many, many years ago, I went to Israel to serve as a community worker in the Interns for Peace program. As part of my work, I went to live in the Israeli Arab village of Kfar Kara. When I first arrived, the youngsters with whom I began to work quickly determined that my name, Peter, would not do. It was not an Arab name. It was virtually unpronounceable by people who lacked a P sound in their own alphabet. And in their considered opinion, it had to be replaced. So I became Bassem, which I was told meant someone who smiles a lot. I took it as a cute compliment, which is exactly how I think it was meant. But when the elders of the village heard about this name change, they were not all too pleased. They called me to a special meeting and said to me, when our sons and daughters go into the Jewish community, many of them have to agree to use Hebrew names if they want a job, so as not to offend the sensibilities of certain Jews with whom they might come into contact. In other words, they are accepted as workers, but not as Arabs. They have to pretend to be something that they're not. We do not want you to have to pretend to be an Arab to be accepted here. We do not want to take away your name. As I left the meeting, I recalled the text repeated so often in our Torah and in our tradition, particularly in the Haggadah that we read on Passover. This is the third of the texts I referred to earlier. You shall not oppress the stranger, for you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. In our country and our community, even here in Hawaii, we have our own strangers who we often ask, even still, either implicitly or otherwise, to change their names, to pretend not to be who they are. Among them are gays and lesbians, transgendered folks, people with disabilities, women, and even people from other places in our own country whose attitudes are dismissed as being too mainland. The fact is, no one should have to pretend to be something they're not to earn our respect. Their uniqueness is a part of who and what they are. If what makes them different makes us uncomfortable, that's our problem, not theirs. Now, I know that what I just said flies in the face of what some of you believe or have been socialized to believe, and I nevertheless ask you to reflect on it rather than to dismiss it out of hand. Of course, the other side of this challenge are those folks for whom we are the different ones. Author Alan Dershowitz, in his book Chutzpah, reminds Jews powerfully and persuasively that if our being accepted in the United States is conditional upon our giving up being who we are, ethnically, religiously, or politically, we are not in effect accepted at all. That is a lesson that is no less and perhaps even more relevant for many other ethnic and social minorities represented in this room and in our wider society. And from Dershowitz's call to be who we are, even if our chutzpah is not what others want to hear, follows another critical principle about intergroup relations. We cannot be who we are unless we know who we are. Which is to say, our strategy for reaching out to other groups and other cultures must begin with our learning about and being more secure in our own cultures. Yes, we must, in the words of Leviticus, learn to love our neighbors as ourselves. But in order to do this, we must learn first to love ourselves at least as much as we love our neighbors. If not, we cannot possibly open ourselves up to them in any meaningful way. Without a strong sense of who we are, we risk the kind of condescension so characteristic of old-fashioned liberals who, often ignorant and or antagonistic toward their own deeply rooted cultural values, sought to assume the values of other, more authentic cultures. We chance our attempts to reach out being superficial and therefore short-lived, derived not from enduring traditions, but rather based on an ephemeral notion of political correctness. Without clear identities of our own, our efforts at building bridges are doomed to actually widen the differences between us. Because if we don't know what we have, we can't possibly know what we share with others. Until we are standing on firm ground, we have no basis for common ground. There is, of course, nothing wrong with identifying and celebrating the many aspects of our respective cultures that we share with one another, and the many ways in which, when our unique cultural fabric is removed, we are cut from the same cloth. Nothing at all. But at the same time, we might consider the possibility that the seeds of genuine love and wholeness come paradoxically, or maybe not, from the very differences and disagreements that we experience in our ongoing interactions and our relationships with one another. We all seek a voice of truth and of comfort, and each of us has heard that voice in our own way. May we never shrink from opportunities to share with others the significance of the words and the music we have heard. May we each draw from our own experience at the mountain to find the sparks of God and of good that reside deep down inside all of us, even as we are enlightened by the wisdom of those around us. And to this let us say, Amen. Thank you.